of advancing workplace safety. OSHA's mission is to ensure the hardworking men and women of this nation are given safe and healthy working conditions. The agency fulfills this mission by setting and enforcing safety standards and by providing education, outreach, and compliance assistance to both employers and employees. When necessary, OSHA's enforcement efforts include monetary and even criminal penalties, all with the goal of protecting workers. That mission is critically important. However, in recent years, we've seen a regulatory approach that in many cases may have gone beyond OSHA's statutory authority under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. While these actions may have been well-intentioned, they often created confusion or imposed overly broad mandates that didn't meet the realities of the industries affected, especially for small businesses. For example, OSHA's attempt to implement a nationwide COVID vaccine mandate, later struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court, raised serious issues a worker walk-around rule, which opened the door to third-party individuals, even those without workplace safety backgrounds, entering job sites to do safety inspections. And the proposed heat standard, while addressing a real concern, takes a one-size-fits-all approach that fails to account for a wide range of conditions and different industries and regions. We've also seen an expansion of enforcement tools, such as the Severe Violator Enforcement Program and the instance-by-instance citation policy that may reflect a view of employers as adversaries rather than partners in workplace safety. That's a misguided perspective. Obviously, small businesses succeed when their employees succeed, and most of their employers take workplace safety very seriously. OSHA's mission is too important to be undermined by overreach. As the nature of work continues to change, broad-based regulatory efforts can unintentionally create more problems than they solve. That's why today's conversation is so critically important. For instance, the tree care industry has petitioned for the creation of a federal tree care standard for nearly 2 decades. This is one of the most dangerous industries in the nation, but workers currently rely on a patchwork of standards that do not adequately address the unique challenges of the work being performed. Similarly, because of technological advances with equipment and machinery, OSHA should update its 35-year-old standard on the control of hazardous energy, otherwise known as the lockout-tagout standard. While we saw progress on both fronts under the first Trump administration, now is the time to push for these solutions to be resolved. Republicans, under this American economy and this administration, we know that America flourishes when workers flourish. I look forward to the hearing for today's witnesses so that they can bring about their knowledge and share with us what can be improved from the past 4 years, the lessons that we've learned, and how we can keep OSHA focused on its core mission of keeping America's workers safe. With that, I yield to my ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. Over the past 100 days, President Trump and his administration have decimated the very agencies and resources that have kept workers safe and healthy. Now, committee Republicans are following suit by holding this hearing to attack the work of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We should all be able to recognize a basic truth. No job should ever be a death sentence. Workers deserve to come home to their families at the end of the day, not in pain, not in fear, but alive and well. To protect that fundamental right, Congress passed landmark safety laws and established important agencies like OSHA, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. But all of these 3 agencies have been chronically underfunded since their inception. And largely because of that, they have long struggled to robustly defend workers from preventable injuries, illnesses, and death at work. In the 54 years since it was established, OSHA has made great strides, but it remains hamstrung by an overly complicated regulatory process, persistent underfunding, and the long uphill battle of updating standards to reflect scientific advances. Despite these constraints, OSHA took action during the Biden administration and proposed common sense safeguards, like the heat stress rule, to prevent tragedies in the workplace. Rather than build on that progress, the Trump administration is now threatening to dismantle any government program or agency that prioritizes workers' health and protects workers on the job. At one point, DOGE targeted at least 11 OSHA field offices to be permanently shut down, including the only office in Louisiana, located in what is known as Cancer Alley due to the presence of over 200 chemical plants and the high rates of cancer in the area. MSHA has at least 30 field offices slated for closure on DOGE's hit list, including an office created in response to the Upper Big Branch mine disaster. And while we face a surge in child labor violations, DOGE is still cutting staff division offices. Shutting down field offices will endanger workers' lives by cutting off the public from DOL's most vital services. This also means severely limiting the geographic coverage of inspectors and investigators, enforcement activities against law-breaking companies, and further restraining an already resource-strapped DOL. And it doesn't stop here. On April 1st, nearly the entire NIOSH workforce was placed on leave with the promise of being fired later this summer by HHS Secretary Kennedy. In one sweeping move, Secretary Kennedy put 50 years of scientific expertise and public health research at risk. DOGE kicked out NIOSH staffers, paid them to not work, and then after realizing that effectively eliminating NIOSH was a mistake, the Trump administration started to reverse course and rehired only some of those staff. This entire circus is wasteful, expensive, and harmful for workers, a description that could only apply to most of DOGE's actions. Workers are not expendable. They are not a statistic. OSHA and NIOSH do the essential work of keeping workers safe. We must fund them properly and strengthen the laws that support their mission. In my own district, we are already feeling the consequences of these cuts. The University of Minnesota's Midwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety is one of just 18 NIOSH-funded education and research centers in the nation. It trains the next generation of workplace safety experts in the region and helps protect our workers in high-risk industries. Without NIOSH, the invaluable research and workforce development provided by that center and others like it across the country will be lost. That means fewer trained medical and safety professionals, less research capacity to prevent fatal accidents, and ultimately more injuries, more deaths, and more grieving families. Democrats are committed to honoring those workers who have been harmed or killed on the job, not just with words, but with action to change the system. Recently, Ranking Member Scott, Representative Courtney, and I reintroduced the Protecting Americans Workers Act, a bill that would make long overdue improvements to the enforcement of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. This bill would expand coverage to millions of workers currently excluded from the law's protections and strengthen whistleblower protections. These reforms are critical to preventing the most serious violations that endanger worker safety. Democrats are also championing legislation to protect healthcare and social workers from violence, to make mining safer, and to prevent illness, injury from extreme heat. This is what it means to have an agenda to ensure safety. And with that in mind, I hope that we can have a productive discussion today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. 14 days after this hearing. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material noted during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I note that the subcommittee, there may be some of my colleagues who are joining who are not permanent members of this subcommittee. They may be waiving on for the purpose of today's hearing. Now for the introduction of witnesses. I'll start. Our first witness is Mr. Jake Parson, the president of the Northeast Division of CRH America's Materials in West Hartford, Connecticut, testifying on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers. Our second witness is Mr. Bren Tresselt, the president and owner of Arborist Enterprises in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, testifying on behalf of the Tree Care Industry Association. Our third witness is Mr. Jordan Barab, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of OSHA from Tacoma Park, Maryland. And our final witness is Ms. Felicia Watson, a senior counsel for Littler Mendelson in Washington, D.C. We want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, and we look forward to each of your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I will ask that each of you limit your oral testimony to a 3-minute summary of the written testimony that you provided. The clock will count down from 3 minutes as committee members have many questions for you, and we would like to spend our time doing as many questions as possible. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D, the committee practice, however, is that we will not cut off testimony until we reach the 5-minute mark. I'd like to also remind the witnesses to be aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. And with that, I will recognize our first testifier today. Mr. Parson, you can please begin.
Good morning, Chairman McKenzie, Ranking Member Omar, and members of the subcommittee. As you said, my name is Jake Parson, and I'm proud to serve as the division president for the Northeast Division of CRH America's Materials. In 1952, my great-grandfather founded Jack B. Parson Companies in Brigham City, Utah, with a simple but powerful ambition to build and to make a difference. That spirit has guided 4 generations of our family in the construction materials industry, and I carry it with me in my role at CRH today. CRH is the largest building materials company in the world. Our 50,000 employees across 48 states help build the infrastructure you depend on and craft the backyards you enjoy. You may not know us as CRH, but you might know us as Pensy Supply in Pennsylvania, Michigan Paving in Michigan, Moser in Indiana, and Hinkle in Kentucky. CRH takes great pride in our local communities and takes our responsibility very seriously to ensure the safety of our employees and our subcontractors. Common sense labor policies support manufacturing operations and empower the American worker. But recent actions by the Department of Labor threaten to impose unworkable rules that do very little to improve safety. If we want to grow manufacturing in the U.S., we need to rebalance regulations that cost manufacturers $350 billion every year. This is real money that could be spent on hiring people, building new facilities, and creating new products. OSHA has put forward costly rules that ignore the complexity of U.S. manufacturing. One problematic regulation is the proposed heat rule. A one-size-fits-all heat standard ignores the work manufacturers already do to protect our employees, and it ignores the unique ways in which it is done. When it comes to heat, what makes sense for Maine does not make sense in Texas. During my time leading an asphalt production and paving business in Texas, I saw firsthand how extreme heat impacts our teams and how local expertise and adaptive safety measures are critical. Now, overseeing similar operations in the Northeast, I face a completely different climate and set of challenges. Any standard must reflect the realities of our industry and the diverse environments in which we operate. The proposed rule imposes significant mandates on manufacturers without fully grappling with or understanding whether they are feasible or cost-effective. The result would be reduced production and ultimately fewer jobs. We can do better. Working together, manufacturers will continue to communicate best practices already in place to protect our employees. Collaboration is going to become increasingly important. This is the best path forward to keep workers safe and grow our economy. I am proud to continue my family's tradition, leading thousands of Americans workers at CRH. Manufacturers in America provide safe, well-paying jobs that strengthen our communities. We will continue to support OSHA in its mission of safety and provide this committee with the input you need to make sound policy. Working together, we can enhance our nation's economic competitiveness and empower the American worker. Thank you for inviting me to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Tresselt for your testimony.
Chairman McKenzie, Ranking Member Omar, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Ben Tresselt, and I'm the president of Overreach Enterprises, a total tree care company located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm also the former chairman of the Tree Care Industry Association. I'm here today to urge OSHA to finalize a long overdue safety standard for tree care, one that reflects OSHA's core mission of protecting workers through clear, practical rules. Tree care is an extremely technical and very hazardous occupation. Crews work aloft using chainsaws, aerial lifts, and cranes, often near homes, roads, and power lines. Tree care workers suffer serious injuries and fatalities well above the national averages, making our industry one of the most hazardous. That is why at our company, we've worked hard to build a safety-first culture. We perform safety job assessments before every project, provide and maintain high-quality climbing and protective gear for our employees, and follow the ANSI Z133, our industry's consensus safety standard. Safety is at the core of how we hire, train, and operate. Despite these efforts, OSHA continues to regulate our industry through a patchwork of standards that don't reflect the unique hazards or work conditions of tree care. This creates confusion and places unnecessary compliance burdens on employers trying to do the right thing. Crane access into the tree is one clear example. In many cases, lifting a climber into a tree using a crane is the safest option, especially when the tree is structurally compromised, in a tight space, or located above a hazard. The ANSI Z133 supports this safe method. Several state OSHA plans also support it, but the federal OSHA still applies a general rule of cranes prohibiting lifting climbers into the tree, leaving the employer vulnerable to citation. At the same time, OSHA maintains 5 regional emphasis programs that explicitly direct inspectors to identify tree care operations. But once they do, there's no tree care specific standard to apply. It's a nationwide enforcement effort without the right tools to carry it out effectively. In 2020, I served on OSHA's SBREFA panel concerning tree care safety standard. The recommended outcome was clear: move forward with an OSHA standard grounded in the ANSI Z133. Yet OSHA has delayed the rule at least 8 times, while more complex rules have advanced. A dedicated tree care safety standard won't expand the rule book, but it would clarify it by replacing outdated, misapplied rules with ones tailored to our type of work. In short, this kind of smart, focused standard is exactly what OSHA was designed to deliver: a standard that protects workers, supports responsible businesses, and makes regulation more effective. I respectfully urge the subcommittee to ensure OSHA finalizes a safety standard for tree care. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I will welcome your questions.
Thank you, and next I will recognize Mr. Baird for your testimony.
Thank you for inviting me here to testify, but I will take issue with the title of this hearing. OSHA's problem is not overreach, but rather underreach. Last year, I told this committee about Gabrielle Infante, a Texas construction worker who died of heat stroke, a death that would have been prevented had OSHA's heat standard been in place. These preventable tragedies continue. Last August, Baltimore Public Works employee Ron Silver II tragically died of heat stroke. The state of Maryland has since issued a tough heat standard, a standard that would have saved Ron Silver's life. More than 712,000 workers now can say their lives have been saved since the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Far fewer workers are dying today from asbestos-related disease or diseases caused by exposure to lead, formaldehyde, because of OSHA standards. OSHA standards have significantly reduced deaths in confined spaces and deep trenches. Fewer workers fall to their deaths or have their limbs crushed in machinery. Work-related hepatitis B deaths have virtually been eliminated since OSHA issued its blood-borne pathogen standard. And I could go on and on. Unfortunately, despite the lives saved by OSHA, the original mission of the agency, to assure the safety and health of American workers through enforcement of OSHA standards, has not been realized. It's difficult to comprehend today, but only 3 senators and 58 representatives voted against passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act in 1970. OSHA is a tiny agency with a minuscule budget and an enormous mission to ensure the work safety of 11.8 million workplaces covering 161 million workers. In fiscal year 2024, OSHA had only 1,800 inspectors, 1 inspector for every 84,937 workers. If OSHA was to inspect every workplace in the country just once, it would take 185 years, almost 2 centuries. And it only promises to get worse. OSHA has lost 10% of its staff due to early retirements, and very little likelihood that any of these positions will be refilled. This is hardly a recipe for reclaiming OSHA's mission. OSHA's standard-setting process is in shambles. It can take 7 to 10 to 20 years to issue a single OSHA standard. The founders of this act would undoubtedly be shocked and disappointed if they knew what had become of OSHA today. They never would have envisioned an agency that would take decades to issue a standard and centuries to inspect workplaces. This is a clear example of underreach, and the main solution is not difficult. Significantly increase funding for OSHA's enforcement and standards program and modernize the law. While this hearing focuses on OSHA's mission, I cannot ignore the chaos at NIOSH, because the functioning of NIOSH is critical to the mission of OSHA. Almost the entire NIOSH staff was riffed last month, and a few were brought back and restored a couple of days ago because of a court order. NIOSH provides life-saving support to miners suffering from black lung disease, workers in the agriculture and fishing industry, firefighters who suffer disproportionately from cancer and heart disease, provides compensation to 9/11 workers as well as to America's nuclear veterans who built America's nuclear arsenal. Most of these workers have not been brought back, and their programs are not operating, despite Secretary Kennedy's claims that they are just being reorganized. And I'm sorry to say, but Secretary Kennedy was lying at yesterday's Senate hearing when he claimed that no working scientists at HHS were fired. Hundreds of working scientists and engineers at NIOSH have been riffed. Before closing, I want to emphasize the importance of some of the standards that OSHA should prioritize. First, the heat standard. More workers died from heat working in construction than any other industry last year. Just in at least 55 workers died from heat on the job in 2023, which was a 28% increase from 2022, and 121 workers died from the effects of heat from 2017 to 2022. The solutions laid out in OSHA's proposal are simple, flexible, inexpensive, desperately needed, and long overdue. COVID-19, Ebola, avian flu, tuberculosis, MRSA are just a few of the infectious diseases that healthcare workers are not protected from because aside from bloodborne pathogens, there is no infectious disease standard. The danger is obvious. Thousands of healthcare workers died from COVID during the COVID pandemic. Assaults against healthcare workers and social service workers are a serious problem, and a standard is clearly needed. In fact, this House has twice passed bipartisan legislation requiring OSHA to issue a standard. To restore OSHA's mission and prevent underreach, Congress should first significantly increase OSHA's enforcement and standard-setting budget. Second, pass legislation enabling OSHA to quickly update antiquated standards for toxic substances and other hazards. Third, urge OSHA to issue heat, infectious disease, tree care, violence, and emergency response standards. And finally, permanently restore NIOSH. Thank you.
Thank you. Lastly, I'll recognize Ms. Watson for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman McKenzie, Ranking Member Omar, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the important topic of ensuring OSHA's mission without overreach. I'm here today to emphasize the shared goal of increasing compliance with the OSHA Act while safeguarding the ability of employers and employees to thrive in their chosen professions. With more than 2 decades in the residential construction industry, I've observed some consistent themes within OSHA's regulatory and enforcement efforts, and would like this subcommittee to consider these points. First, OSHA has already has the ability to address worker walk-around, employee representation, instance by instance, and the severe violator enforcement program. OSHA has shifted away from its original mission of focusing on workplace safety into the role of a disciplinarian, evidenced by the update to the instance-by-instance policy and expansion from applying only to willful citations to all others, including other than serious violations specific to record keeping. Multiple record-keeping violations do not improve workplace safety. Likewise, the worker walk-around amendments were unnecessary because it addressed a non-existent issue. There was no actual concern to be remedied. Processes already existed to ensure employees were fully able to participate in any inspection, but the agency broadened who could participate as an employee representative to non-party, third-party non-requirements that these individuals have any particular expertise, which seems contrary to the regulation's requirement of good cause and reasonably necessary. Even more problematic is that the OSHA inspector has ultimate authority to decide whether good cause and reasonably necessary requirements have been met. This expansion also leaves employers with no recourse if the OSHA inspector decides to allow a non-employee third party to participate in that inspection. As with the worker walkaround, OSHA's updates to the instance-by-instance and severe violator enforcement program can already be addressed by rules that are currently in effect. Neither of these add anything to improving safety. OSHA's stated purpose for changing instance by instance is to make OSHA penalties more effective. How does that comport with OSHA's own statement that a general contractor, for example, can end up on the Severe Violator Enforcement Program even if none of its own employees are exposed to the hazard? So these changes ignore the underlying causes, and the focus instead should be away from penalizing employers and finding solutions to these issues. The burden on employers involving paperwork requirements has increased exponentially. Taking the pending heat regulation, the focus is so much on having written plans, updating these plans, keeping records of indoor temperatures, that it leaves employers with little time to focus on safety. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now ask questions of the witnesses for 5 minutes, and I'll recognize myself first. First, Mr. Parson, if the Department of Labor were to move forward with establishing a heat standard, your written testimony calls for a performance-oriented approach to mitigate heat-related hazards. What are the benefits of that kind of approach versus the approach that the Biden administration proposed under their heat standard?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It really provides flexibility. A performance-oriented approach would tie specific standards to specific areas and help industry craft a solution that makes sense for where they are. And so an overall standard sets it up really to fail, and the record keeping associated with it and the time taken to administer it would almost be impossible. So it's not a novel idea necessarily for OSHA. Most employers take great care and looking after heat exhaustion of their employees as it is. And so a real local performance-based approach makes a lot more sense.
Well, I appreciate that. Again, I think we share the desire for worker safety and having standards in place to protect against heat-related hazards. But again, I think you correctly identified the lack of flexibility, the overzealous paperwork requirements that kind of bog down this proposal and ultimately make it unworkable across the country. Mr. Tresselt, in your written testimony, you highlight the benefits of putting a federal tree care standard in place. Those benefits would likely extend to employers, employees, and even OSHA compliance and safety officers conducting inspections or helping with compliance assistance efforts. Can you further explain how creating a standard would be a win-win for everybody involved?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. The standard, as you know, in our industry, it's very hazardous. We have a lot of things going on. We have many workplace problems. A standard would help unify that so that we can work in conjunction with our employees, our employers, and OSHA. So by unifying this standard, we would get rid of the patchwork that occurs right now. We don't really have a standard that addresses all of our concerns as far as what we see on a daily basis in safety. I know in my business we have a lot of concerns because if we had an OSHA inspection, we might be called out on things that might not pertain to exactly what we're doing, and we might be doing something that's completely safe under the Z133, but may not be a standard that's already in the OSHA rule. So unifying this would help us protect our workers. It would help employers have a guideline on how to help their workers, and it would give all the citation or the OSHA people a clear picture of what we're doing and judge us on that, not on a standard that wouldn't reflect what we actually do out in the workplace.
Well, thank you for that, and it's a prime example of where I think we can improve worker safety and do it in partnership, in conjunction with the feedback that we're getting from the industry. It's been a missed opportunity, I think, for a long time that administrations in the past have talked about it, ultimately been unsuccessful in doing that. And in the last administration, my opinion is they were, again, because of their overreach and focus on things that OSHA should not have been doing, they were missing the actual opportunity to protect and improve worker safety in an industry like yours. So thank you for that. Final question goes to Ms. Watson. Your background includes decades of experience with home builders. Can you speak to the elements of the Biden proposed heat rule that would have had a significant impact on the construction industry?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the elements of that rule that would affect home building industry, residential construction, actually all construction when you think about it. You've got to have a written heat plan if you have 10 or more employees on the job site. Most residential home builders do not have that many employees. Oftentimes, that is an industry that is filled with specialty trade subcontractors, and so they would not be their employees. So a small home builder might only have 2 or 3 or 4 people. So in theory, they would only need to have a verbal plan. But to show compliance and demonstrate compliance with all of the requirements in the proposed heat rule, they'd effectively have to have a written plan, because otherwise how can they demonstrate to OSHA that they've analyzed all the job site hazards for those workers, that they've trained them on heat and all the 16 elements in the training requirements, that they've done the emergency response, that everybody knows what the phone numbers are to summon emergency medical services. All of those things can be extremely burdensome. And then the fact that they would have to, per the regulation, post it at the job site. And if they don't have to have a written plan per the proposed regulation, how are they going to post something that isn't required to be written?
And appreciate your feedback there. Housing affordability is a critically important issue for so many people all across the country, and we hear time and time again that one of the things impeding home building is the amount of regulations, just the pile of regulations that make it difficult for them to operate. Next, I will go to our ranking member for her 5-minute question.
Mr. Barab, in your testimony, you stressed the critical partnership of NIOSH with OSHA and MSHA. What happens to the work of OSHA and MSHA to protect workers, including firefighters and miners, if the Trump administration continues down the path to fire large numbers of NIOSH employees?
Yeah, so NIOSH plays an extremely critical role in protecting both miners, as you mentioned, and firefighters. Let me start with firefighters. Firefighters are known to suffer a very high incidence and disproportionately from cancers as well as respiratory disease. And NIOSH basically assembles a register of firefighters that protects them and identifies the risks that firefighters face. They're the only agency that does this, and although some positions at NIOSH have been restored, the firefighter registry has not been restored yet, which leaves firefighters across the country. These are the guys that rush in to homes to protect us, without the kind of knowledge and protections they need to prevent them from getting cancer and heart disease. The mine issue is much more critical. Miners are suffering a much higher rate of black lung disease because of their exposure to silica in the mines these days, a disease called progressive massive fibrosis, which hits miners at a much younger age. Miners in their 30s and 40s are unable to climb the stairs. They end up dying many decades earlier than they would have. It's a tragedy and a preventable tragedy, and NIOSH provides the kind of, they provide surveillance, health care to miners. They require miners to be transferred to less dusty positions. They are critical for the safety of miners. Now, some of those positions have been restored as well, but none of the mine functions that deal with safety in mines, with the machinery in mines, other things like developing technology that will measure silica exposure on a daily basis instead of having to send the samples out and waiting weeks till you find out if you were overexposed 2 weeks ago. All of those functions are gone.
Yeah. And I know that yesterday, the Secretary Kennedy announced a reinstatement of around 1/3 of the NIOSH staff who were targeted for reduction in force. What are some of the NIOSH workers that will be left unstaffed if the NIOSH employees are now reinstated immediately? Yeah,
well, I mentioned the firefighter staff and a lot of the mine safety staff, but also NIOSH does health hazard evaluations, for example. They go in and they investigate when you find a lot of workers getting sick in a workplace for no discernible reason. NIOSH will go in there and try to figure out what's happening. NIOSH plays a role in preventing the transmission of avian influenza in workplaces. Fishermen and agricultural workers have some of the highest death rates and injury rates in the American economy. NIOSH works on technical issues and researching ways to make jobs safer for those workers. There's just an enormous number of things that NIOSH does that nobody really knows about, except for the workers whose lives are extended and injuries are prevented from the work of NIOSH.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the National Safety Council on the importance for business leaders of the work of OSHA and NIOSH.
Without objection.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, that there is a NIOSH-funded education and research center in my district that will be impacted by these cuts. This center and others like it are in universities around the country, fulfill NIOSH's responsibility under the Occupational Safety and Health Act, not only to facilitate important research, but also to ensure a steady supply of experts. Mr. Barab, how important it is to have field of experts trained specifically in occupational safety and health?
It's crucial. I mean, these are the people that run our health and safety system, and not just at OSHA or not just at NIOSH, throughout industry as well. These are people that receive their education largely through NIOSH education and resource centers. You can look at doctors, occupational physicians. NIOSH runs these ERCs, run the residence programs for the ERCs to train occupational physicians. I went to a conference, actually an ERC conference a couple of weeks ago in New York, and I asked, this was probably a couple of hundred people there, I asked how many of and these were people from, they were from businesses, from unions, from universities, from health groups. I asked how many of them, either in whole or in part, whose careers depended on the work that the ERCs did. Every single person in the room raised their hand. If we lose this pipeline, if we lose these people, we will have a major shortage of health and safety professionals in this country, and that can do nothing but not only endanger workers, but also raise the price of, for companies who are trying to hire health and safety professionals who have to deal with these shortages.
Yeah. Thank you. I yield back.
Next, we'll go to Mr. Mesmer from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all the witnesses for being here today. As currently proposed, OSHA's heat, illness, and injury prevention rule is unworkable, overly prescriptive, and out of step with the practical realities of balancing regulatory compliance and operational needs. It's a one-size-fits-all framework that fails to account for a wide variation in work environments across the industries, including differences in job functions and geographic climates. Ms. Watson, while we all agree on the importance of protecting workers' health and safety, how could this rule be revised to allow employers to tailor compliance strategies to their specific circumstances?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think one of the main reasons, or one of the main ways that it can be revised to actually be workable is to really focus on even something that formed the basis of OSHA's National Emphasis Program on heat, and that is water, rest, shade, but also having training, which is also part of OSHA's existing National Emphasis Program, and really focusing on what it means, what it looks like, how to recognize the signs and symptoms of heat illness and heat stroke, what to do in that emergency, and focus on those elements, providing water, providing shade. Many of the home builders I've spoken with across the country, when this rule first hit OSHA's radar of doing a rulemaking, prior to even the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, was how do we keep this simple? How do we get this so everybody understands what they're supposed to do, and that they can comply with it, and it needs to be flexible. I've talked to builders in New Mexico who say 80 degrees is a great day to build. It's perfect weather. And you might have something completely different in Florida. So the heat triggers are a little bit difficult, but really the focus of a program or a regulation should be water, rest, shade, rest breaks when they need them, not necessarily mandated every 2 hours if under the high heat trigger is proposed. Having something that is clear and straightforward and provides that flexibility for the type of job site it is or workplace it is, but also that the employees can understand, and it needs to use terms that are simple and clear-cut. A lot of employees struggle with that word, acclimatization. How do you say it? What does it mean? What does it really look like in practice? And so that that reality needs to be that it has to be something that is workable, that everybody understands, that is simple and straightforward. The more complex, the more burdensome the regulation is for rulemaking and record keeping, that just makes it harder for small businesses, especially, to handle. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parson, the Biden OSHA ignored calls from employers to consider the climate varies from region to region. What may be considered an extreme temperature in one part of the country could be normal in another. How does the geographic location of employees determine the best way to protect them from heat-related injuries and illnesses?
I think similar to what Ms. Watson said, the challenges in Texas are different than the challenges in Maine. And the geographies are different, the employees are different, and they're used to working in different climates. And so having a standard that says this fits everybody and is going to work for everybody makes no sense. In my career, we were paving roads in Austin, Texas in July. And you can imagine the heat involved with that. So local management, providing local solutions and looking after your own employees, they're on the ground, makes much more sense than prescription in this case. And so trying to figure out what that means is going to be important.
Okay, thank you. Could you go into detail on if a heat rule was enacted, how the heat rule would negatively impact members of your association and what changes you'd have to make to comply to the rule?
It would definitely increase cost and likely decrease productivity. So it's going to get in the way of making progress on the things that we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Watson, is there a way under existing law that the federal government could supersede state heat standards through regulatory action?
Your Honor, excuse me, sir, I think the problem with that potentially is, and not having looked at this issue in detail, is that the OSHA Act itself allows states to come up with their own plans, provided that they're at least as effective as federal OSHA. Now, while federal OSHA has never identified or defined what at least as effective as means, the states do have the ability to come up with their plans. So with respect to any type of preemption, that would be difficult, and that would take thorough analysis, which I don't think the committee needs to hear at this point, but it should be something that is focused and consistent across the states. I mean, I think that's one of the issues with a lot of the people I've spoken with that fall under the scope of this, is that the rules in all these different states are conflicting. So if a business has multiple locations, each one is going to be slightly different, and I think that inconsistency is extremely problematic.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Kassar from Texas.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Parson, so to be clear, your organization, y'all are advocating against the heat standard as proposed under the last administration. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you were just talking about paving streets in Austin, Texas. I happen to be an Austin City Council member just recently, helping make sure that we pave those streets. And it sounded like you were saying that we have different conditions in Maine as we do in Texas. But what I'm confused about is when it's 90 degrees in Austin or 90 degrees in Maine, 90 degrees is still about 90 degrees, correct?
Correct.
And do you think that it's appropriate for someone to have to work outdoors, paving streets, or up on a scaffold in 90-degree heat or 95-degree heat or 100-degree heat for 4 or 5 hours without being allowed to come off the scaffold or without being allowed to take a water break?
No, sir.
And would your organization be in favor of having a baseline requirement that, let's say it's a 90-degree day, that you aren't allowed to have somebody out there working on the scaffold without coming down for 4 or 5 hours without taking a water break?
I think our view would be more flexibility in the mandate. So exactly what you're saying. So when does that make sense? How do you manage it? How do you implement it, rather than a hard and fast rule?
But you would oppose a rule that said if you're working in 90-degree heat, and 90 degrees happens more often in Austin than it does in Maine.
Correct.
But it does happen in both places. If you were working paving a road in Austin, Texas, or in Maine, would you be opposed to a rule that said you can't have to go work 4 or 5 hours and without taking a drink of water in 90-degree heat paving a road?
No, I would not be opposed to a rule that says that.
You would not be opposed to that rule?
Correct.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that answer. Ms. Watson, could you tell me the same? If somebody is working in 90-degree heat for 4 or 5 hours, paving a road up on a scaffold, would you be opposed to a rule nationwide that says, no, we can't have somebody working 4 or 5 hours in over 90-degree heat without being able to take a break?
No, sir, there would be no opposition to that. And the idea behind working in temperatures like that is that they take their rest breaks as needed.
Yeah, I think that people likely need to take rest breaks more often than that. But I think it's helpful to hear, because I heard your advocacy. I appreciate that while there may be some differences around the Biden-era rule as it relates to acclimatization, which I understand is not the easiest word to say, or differences or questions on some of the different triggers, that at least it sounds like there's some level of agreement between the witnesses here and me, a progressive Democrat that was for the Biden-era rule, at least on saying we shouldn't have folks out there working 4 or 5 hours straight in over 90-degree heat without being allowed to take a drink of water. Having that kind of a rule makes sense, it sounds like to me, across industries and across the aisle. And that is very helpful, and I appreciate it. Mr. Barab, I thought that one of the things you said earlier about OSHA was very important when you said that at current staffing levels, it was going to take a really long time for OSHA to investigate every workplace in America. Can you remind us how many years it would take for OSHA to investigate every workplace?
Yeah, in 2024, it would take 185 years. That's almost 2 centuries.
With OSHA getting stretched so thin, I think that major employers that do not focus enough on workplace safety can count on their workplace never being investigated. Last year at a Tesla factory in my district, a worker was electrocuted to death because Tesla failed to follow OSHA regulations that would have protected him. That was the second death at that factory in my district in Southeast Austin. Tesla was fined just $50,000 for their worker's death. For a company valued at about $1 trillion, that is a drop in the bucket. In fact, on his federal government contracts alone, Elon Musk makes that $50,000 back in 9 minutes. And in my view, workers' lives are worth much more than 9 minutes of that man's time. What kind of penalty is that, really? In my view, we are not facing a situation where we're talking about OSHA overreach. In my view, what we need to have is a sufficiently staffed OSHA that all employers feel like they've got to play by the rules, because an employer doesn't feel like they don't know if they're that one employer that gets inspected every 180 years. We've got to be protecting workers' lives, and I actually really do appreciate the testimony today, where even if there's some disagreement on things like a baseline heat rule, that maybe we could at least agree, gosh, if you're working in Texas, where in my district, in the San Antonio part of my district, we might hit 105 this week, the highest temperature ever recorded in San Antonio history in the month of May. We've got to be able to come together and say workers' lives are worth a lot more than they're being priced right now. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Miller from Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Just to set the record straight, Republicans support common sense policies that reduce regulations while keeping our workplace environment safe. Our mission is to protect workers not just from hazards, but also from the crushing weight of Washington's failed bureaucratic overreach. Time and again, we've seen top-down mandates that negatively impact job creation and workers across the country. Employers are job creators and should be seen as active partners in creating safe work environments. Yet, Democrats continue to treat employers as greedy money grabbers who don't care about the well-being of their employees. For instance, the Biden administration's OSHA issued a rushed proposal on heat injury and illness prevention that had the potential to wreak havoc on businesses and communities across the country. Republicans, on the other hand, understand that government red tape can hinder a business and its employees rather than create a positive work environment. The bottom line is that the Biden-Harris OSHA-drafted regulations based on party politics for cheap votes were not keeping workers safer. Republicans are here to fix the problem. So my question is for Ms. Watson. Your written testimony says that Biden's OSHA took the form of a, quote, strict disciplinarian. citing the expansion of the severe violator enforcement program and instance-by-instance citation policy. Can you please discuss what those policies were and how they were expanded under President Biden?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the question. The instance-by-instance policy used to focus on willful violations, and what that meant is if there was a willful violation, that's something where an employer had been acting badly, basically, repeatedly. So that would lend itself to repeated violations that would end up putting them on the willful scope. And so those citations, they could be cited for every instance of a violation of that standard. The problem is that with the expansion, it's focused on the instance by instance now also includes record keeping. So let's say, for example, an employer doesn't fill in their 300 logs, the OSHA logs that they're supposed to complete, and maybe they don't check a box, and maybe they miss that box every single time they fill out that form. Each one of those failures to check that box is a violation. And so that is an instance by instance. It's a paperwork issue. It's not a safety issue. Another example that I used in my testimony is, let's take the OSHA's proposed heat rule. You have employees, you have maybe 8, 10 employees on a job site who run out of water, but no one tells their manager. Nobody tells their supervisor. So the employer doesn't know about that. And then let's say that an OSHA inspector comes out and finds that they ran out of water. So the employer would get could be cited 10 times for failing to provide water for their employees on that job site, even though the employer didn't know about it. And let's say that water wasn't suitably cool. And so that could be another element of another instance by instance violation. And while those failure to provide water is a safety issue, if the employer didn't know about it and nobody told the employer that they were out of water, then obviously that's a problem, and the employee should have been able to tell the employer. But the fact is that, and they can litigate that, certainly, they have that ability to go and do that. But in that instance, in that situation, they could be subject to up to 20. If you have 10 employees, for each time that they violated those requirements, it's per employee, and that is problematic. I think the record keeping is really problematic because it's a paperwork thing. The paperwork violations do nothing to help and improve safety.
Well, I guess that's the weight of Washington's bureaucratic overreach. Mr. Parson, the Biden administration released its proposed heat standard in July of 2024, but this rule was just a mandate designed to appease climate change activists. The proposed rule fails to account for the vastly differing climates in different parts of the country. And so how would this proposed rule negatively impact your business?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier. I think definitely more administrative need and more costly goods to produce. It's just going to make everything more expensive. Listen, our safety of our teams is our number one priority, and that's true for all businesses that I've been a part of anyway. And so if you set that as kind of the baseline, we're going to try to do whatever we can to keep our employees safe and productive and willfully employed. And so trying to figure out how to craft that is priority number one for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Ms. Stevens from Michigan.
Mr. Trussell, last night at about 10:30, I sent my dad a text message. It was a screenshot of I guess what it would look like a poster, but its title was "Advice from a Tree." Stand tall and proud. Go out on a limb. Remember your roots. Drink plenty of water. Be content with your natural beauty. Enjoy the view. Would you agree with the message that I sent my dad?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Absolutely, I would agree with that. I think that's a lovely poem.
I also just messaged my father to see what he was doing because I thought he'd really like to meet you. My dad is a landscaper. He loves trees. He loves arborists. He loves people who are in the business you are in. He was born in 1945 in Detroit on Comstock Street, and he's been in this tree space for a long time. He ran a landscape business. He actually still runs a landscape business. And every day I call my dad and ask him, Dad, are you drinking enough water? Because he is out there on these job sites still. He's got his Ford F-150 with Stevens Landscape on the side of it. He's signing up jobs. Again, Dad turned 80 in January. But I think you might understand why somebody like a proud Michigan man like my father loves what he does and loves to design and loves to work with people like yourself. And so I just wanted to take a moment of personal privilege to share an exchange on that, and I'll have to follow up with you potentially after the hearing. But would you say you're a small business, sir?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so, you're signing up jobs, you're working, and you're taking care of your crew and your team, I have to imagine. Yes. And look, I appreciate with what Mr. Kurtzar shared about this terrible death in the factory, and that shouldn't have happened, and it is outrageous. And you're nowhere near the size of Tesla, is that right?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, so, I'm sure you also care that, we've got these, maybe some of this mismanagement, and we shouldn't have any loss of life. And to Mr. Parson, what your enterprise is up to is really fantastic. And we like that you're paving roads in Austin. We want you to pave roads in Michigan, too. And we know you do. We know you do. And it's really quite remarkable because, we have the snow and the ice, and we're always having to repave our roads. We got a lot of potholes, okay? And we want people at work. And we're really proud of, frankly, the bipartisan work that you've been a part of. And I really see you as a part of it because you helped us pass an infrastructure bill. And we needed to do that. And we need the people working in infrastructure. Now, Mr. Barab, okay, you were in charge of OSHA.
I was Deputy Assistant Secretary.
Okay.
Yes,
and you're right, it's 185 years to go. We don't want you coming down on these small businesses. We want you partnering with people properly. We want people drinking water. We don't want people in the heat. How many people from OSHA that you remember, came out of the, maybe the businesses that Mr. Parson and Mr. Trusselt were a part of? Did you employ a lot of people like that at OSHA?
Well, we did have a lot of people that had, started off in business, and they were often safety managers in businesses, and then decided they wanted that as a career. Yes.
Yeah. And so, how do we get to the place where people aren't being supported in these heat environments? Because not everyone has a daughter like me that cares if their dad's drinking water.
Right. Well, that's why you need a standard, because it actually tells employers what they have to do. And the funny thing is, we were talking about performance standards or as opposed to specification standards. Small businesses usually like specification standards better, where a standard actually tells you what you have to do, because otherwise they have to figure it out for themselves, and that's hard to do. Small businesses also have something called the on-site consultation program. They can get free help to comply with OSHA standards and to make sure their workplaces are safe. So OSHA's very conscious about the needs and the problems of small businesses.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating topic because we are experiencing greater heat in this country and around the world, and as the next couple of decades are projected, and it sounds cute, but we do need to take it seriously. And Mr. Chair, I'm so proud to be on this committee. I'm also on the Science Committee, and I do a lot with the standards there. And standards are important. Coming out of COVID, standards, health safety, very important. The voices on this hearing today, phenomenal, and we salute you. And from one tree gal to another, man who's in the tree business, we salute you, sir, and we thank our friends in the infrastructure with CRH as well. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Next, we go to Mr. Comer from Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Parson, it's great to see you here today. I'm glad we have an affiliate from Hinkle Contracting in Kentucky here speaking at our subcommittee hearing. As you know, in the mountains and farmland of Kentucky, where Hinkle operates, employers have adapted to muggy summer temperatures. Kentucky businesses follow federal OSHA standards and are able to meet the needs of their employees as they see fit. OSHA is set to conduct a public hearing on June 16th to review a proposed federal heat standard. The proposed changes include the implementation of a mandatory 15-minute rest break every 2 hours when the heat index is 90 degrees or higher. Can you provide some context around how this standard would disrupt employers' heat protection plans, which are working in states like Kentucky?
I appreciate the question. It's a good one and something I've been thinking about a lot in preparation for this, this testimony. It sounds easier than it would actually be to implement. And so if you think about how that would actually apply in a business like Hinkle or like ours, you're out paving or you're crushing rock in a quarry, to be able to manage the schedule that way rather than when someone needs a break, they're allowed to take a break.
Yeah.
And so I think we're not little kids, and so we don't necessarily need a rule that says everything we need to do. We do right by our people, we put safety first, and that's worked great for us. To your point, it's worked well.
I wonder if the bureaucrat that wrote that regulation had ever worked 15 minutes in 90-degree weather doing manual labor.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to bet on that. During the last administration, we saw one-size-fits-all standards overpower the voices of America's businesses employees. That was a huge complaint that I had and many employers had with the Biden administration. They tried to overregulate with a one-size-fits-all strategy. Mr. Parson, what advice would you give the new administration when considering changes to regulations for America's diverse manufacturers?
Yeah, I think that is the key word, and that's what I was going to use as well, is diverse. So even in our own industry and infrastructure, we do so many different things. And if you think about all of manufacturing across the United States, it varies widely. It's indoors, it's outdoors, it's freight. It's so big that it's impossible to create a standard that applies to all. And so trying to sort through and figure out something that that will work, or empowering management is what I would say, to take care of your people and do the right thing, that's going to be more powerful.
And I agree. I would like to say this publicly. I would strongly encourage the Trump Department of Labor to consider states which have allowed businesses to maintain flexibility in meeting the needs of their employees when issuing their final heat standard rule and any other planned actions over the next few years. Some states have had great success. The employees are happy. They're productive, getting good results for the taxpayers. In your case, that fund these infrastructure projects. So hopefully the Trump administration will deviate from the Biden administration's over-regulatory obsession and one-size-fits-all solution. So thank you again for being here, and appreciate Hinkle in Kentucky. Yield back.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Ranking Member of the Full Committee, Mr. Scott from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robb, thank you for joining us again. You've done good work in this committee. You've heard about the heat standard. What's wrong with letting the states decide what the heat standards would be?
Well, I mean, nothing's wrong with that. The problem, I mean, in some states, there are about half a dozen states now that have very good heat standards that actually protect workers, but that still leaves, the rest of the states that don't. So ideally, what you want is a strong national standard. And if states want to have stronger standards than that, then that's fine, and that's worked out very well over the last 50 years. But you really need a strong standard. In the meantime, the states are doing what they can to fill in the gaps left.
Thank you. There's a walk-around rule which has people joining the walk-around. You mentioned that inspections can happen once every 185 years, so I suspect if an inspection is going on, there's some concern that's been raised. What harm or what good is there for the employees to be able to select a person to join in the inspection?
Yeah, the OSHA inspector, when the OSHA inspector goes to a workplace, there's only so much the OSHA inspector can figure out, by him or herself. Workers provide an enormous resource to inspectors, informing them about what's going on in the workplace, things they may not see, what kind of processes may be running or may not be running that day. Unfortunately, what the law says essentially is that only workers in unions can have walk-around representatives. Otherwise, OSHA has to just kind of randomly talk to other workers. What this does, and it was, it existed even before to a certain extent, it allows OSHA to talk to other experts, or it allows the workers to bring in other experts to help them, maybe with language difficulties, maybe with technical issues that the OSHA inspector may not be familiar with, or to avoid retaliation, because a lot of workers really don't want to talk, don't feel safe talking to OSHA inspectors on the job. We know this is not problematic because it's been done before. The Mine Safety and Health Act, for example, allows third-party worker representatives to walk around with MSHA inspectors. There's never been a problem with that. There's never been disruption in the workplace. There's never been undercover organizing activities. This whole opposition to the walk-around standard is really kind of a red herring.
Thank you. Have you noticed any rational basis on who was being fired at NIOSH?
No, they fired the entire agency. They brought back parts of it that had, a strong interest in West Virginia, where we have some powerful Republican senators. And there was a lot of news, a lot of media about some of the coal-related stuff, and those are the things they happened to bring back. But unfortunately, NIOSH doesn't.
What's wrong with letting politics decide who gets called back?
Well, yeah.
A news article this morning has the Republican legislator bragging about the fact that he got NIOSH programs back in his district. What's wrong with letting that happen? What could go wrong?
Yeah, unfortunately, you have districts where you don't have, may not have powerful senators or politicians. A lot of what NIOSH does is crucially important, but doesn't make as many headlines as, coal miners suffering from black lung. The firefighters, the fisher people, agriculture, those don't make as many headlines as miners. And yet their lives are just as valuable, and unfortunately they are just as at risk in many places as miners are. All workers in the United States need equal protection, not just those that get the most publicity.
Thank you. You served on the inside at OSHA. We have asked what access DOJ has at the Department of Labor. We haven't gotten an answer. What do you think DOJ has access to, and why should we be concerned?
Well, yeah, you're right. We don't know exactly what kind of access DOJ has, but it's extremely important that the crucial information in the entire Department of Labor, but particularly in OSHA, be kept confidential. I mean, you don't want business owners to know what kind of the inside, of what's going on with an investigation of their own companies. There are a lot of retaliation concerns among workers. OSHA enforces retaliation laws of 25 different retaliation laws, and it's confidentiality of workers in those cases is also extremely important. You expand out from OSHA to the BLS. I mean, BLS assembles an enormous amount of confidential information that can as they say, move markets. So obviously you don't want business executives to know that information ahead of time or have access to that information where they can determine what kind of investments they're going to make in the stock market. That information needs to remain absolutely confidential to everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that a transcript of the report from this morning's news outlining the West Virginia situation be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. And next we go to Mr. Grothman from Wisconsin.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Watson. OSHA's proposed rule right now, and we talked about this before, adopts a one-size-fits-all rule for heat, illness, and injury prevention. Identical requirements across indoor, outdoor environments across all sectors, including agriculture, construction, and manufacturing, without differentiation. This broad application fails to consider critical distinctions in worksite conditions. How does OSHA justify imposing identical obligations on such a broad and diverse range of workplaces?
Thank you, sir, for the question. Their justification, obviously, is to protect workers. I know that during the rulemaking process, during the SABRIFA panels, those discussions and the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, many people requested industry-specific standards that apply to the unique differences among their industries. So I'm familiar with construction, residential construction, so I'll speak to that. Job sites change daily, sometimes hourly, depending on what's going on. And what works in manufacturing, where you might have a static situation, obviously not all manufacturing, but there are circumstances where you have a static work environment. That doesn't change. That's much easier to manage than a construction site where you've got roofers coming and they're installing the roof, and then they're going on to the next job site, and then you've got people coming in and doing the house wrap. And so that constant changing isn't helpful, and I think that concern among stakeholders that I've spoken with is that if you treat everyone exactly the same with limited flexibility, it makes it difficult to get a robust plan that is specific to the industry.
It's the type of thing that causes people to hate government, right?
Maybe, yes.
Maybe, okay.
Sometimes, yes, sir.
Okay. You raised many questions about the walk-around rule. We'll kind of touch on this again. Can you expand on potential liability, employer liability in the event a third-party representative is injured during a walk-around inspection?
Yes, sir, thank you. So OSHA actually addressed that because a number of stakeholders raised those during their comments in this process. And OSHA basically responded in the final rule saying that there were plenty of statutes available at the state and local level, tort liability, those types of things, and so OSHA wasn't going to comment or make a determination on that. So essentially, OSHA's not involved in that piece of it. If someone's injured and they end up suing the employer where the job site was, it's up to the state court systems to sort it.
We'll ask Mr. Barab a question here. As I understand it, in my district, we had just a tragedy in which a young man died in an agriculture accident. And it was a small farm. I guess the guy had maybe 3 or 4 employees. Kind of surprised his mother that OSHA would not apparently do an investigation even if somebody died. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you're talking about Stacy Siebold and her 19-year-old son, Mitch McDaniel, who was killed by an auger in a farm in your district. Yeah, OSHA, the Congress has put a rider on OSHA's appropriations bill since the 1970s, saying that OSHA cannot basically step foot on a farm with 10 or fewer employees. They can't go in for an investigation, even a fatality investigation. They can't even go in and pass out fact sheets. Yeah, it's a terrible injustice, and we're seeing, we see a lot of workers, including young workers like Mitch McDaniel, die on these workplaces that, from hazards that are preventable, and where the employer and all employers could learn from an OSHA investigation, yet OSHA is not allowed to go onto those workplaces.
So in other words, if there were 11 guys on the farm, they could have investigated.
Exactly, but with 10 workers could die on a farm, and OSHA still wouldn't be able to go onto the farm.
Yeah, and you could have, if it was a little bakery with 5 employees, OSHA could get involved.
If somebody got killed in a bakery with 5 employees, OSHA would get involved, yes.
But for some reason, can you think of any philosophical reason why, if somebody dies, we're not even going to talk about somebody becoming a paraplegic for the rest of their life. Somebody dies under the current law, we apparently don't express it.
I think we're dealing with the power of the agriculture industry and the so-called sanctity of the small farm. I don't know. This is kind of a myth, again, that was created, and this, again, that's been on the books since the 1970s. It makes no sense, and workers are dying because of it. So,
well, thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. And next we'll go to Chairman of the Full Committee, Mr. Wahlberg from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having this hearing today. It brings a lot of memories back to me of some of the things we've dealt with since 2006. And so, Mr. Trusselt, I do want to start with you. Your written testimony states that the tree care industry has a fatality rate estimated to be 10 to 30 times higher than a national average, with more than 1,000 injuries each year, all significant, all important. Do you believe there would be a significant reduction in your industry's fatality and injury rate if OSHA's had a significant standard in place?
Thank you, Congressman. Having a OSHA standard in place would help. We're never going to, unfortunately, get rid of all of our fatalities, but it definitely would help. It would take the ANSI Z133 standard, which is a consensus standard in our industry, and make it the platform on which OSHA could take and distribute to all those companies. The fatalities that we mostly see are what's called struck-bys, things falling out of a tree, hitting people. The ANSI Z133 addresses that very specifically by making sure that those areas are very well defined. So in our company, when we have a job briefing prior to starting a job, working a loft, we take the time to note where the things are going to fall from the tree. We mark that area off as a no-go zone, and everybody on the crew knows that. So that is one of the examples that we would utilize through the ANSI Z133, that currently OSHA doesn't have that in their general duty clause, that we could help a lot of our problems. Taking this standard and making it uniform across the board with all of the Z133 standards would help tremendously. I would like to say that we could reduce it significantly, but there's always those things. We work with nature.
Well, you've been asking for the standard since 2006.
Correct.
And you've been, as it were, left out on a limb with multiple, sometimes conflicting patchwork of standards across the United States. What do you believe is the reason for the delay?
I don't really have a direct answer for that. I think maybe other priorities in OSHA have taken precedent over our small industry compared to what the broad spectrum that OSHA has to regulate.
Well, we're talking about lives, in this case, where it's amazing the industry itself is asking for it.
Correct.
That doesn't happen all the time, and I think that's unique. Thank you. Ms. Watson, your written testimony highlights 6 concerns over the Biden administration's worker walk-around rule. I want to go back to that. It greatly expands the opportunity for third parties to gain access to job sites. The rule seemingly opens the door for a union official to serve as a third-party employee representative when the union is not an exclusive bargaining representative at the workplace. How does this rule overstep the OSHA Act and potentially conflict with the National Labor Relations Act?
Thank you for the question. Yes, sir. I think OSHA has a different mission. OSHA's remit is different than the National Labor Relations Act. OSHA uses employee representative, which doesn't have the safeguards that are outlined and used in the National Labor Relations Act. That act governs workplace representation of unions. When you've got a worker walk-around situation where you've got, you actually could have a couple of scenarios. You could have a non-union work site, and maybe union wants to get their foot in the door, and so they might come and—
Do you believe that would happen? And anyway, I know the answer. Okay.
And it's not a negative on union representation, because they do serve an important purpose. Sure. But the point here is that a non-employee third party is able to talk to employees, and all it takes, if you've got 2 people on a work site, all it takes is one to say yes, they can come on. And so that's potentially the problem. But the other problem is that employee bargaining is governed by the National Labor Relations Act. It doesn't fall within OSHA's remit. And so that is something that is troubling.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Parson, I appreciate Michigan's, your workforce in Michigan. And I'll ask you in the final few seconds here about the heat standard, specifically as it impacts movement of freight with the truck driver. What's the problem?
I think freight's really problematic. You're moving all kinds of different things. So we move a lot of stone, asphalt, ready-mix concrete, perishable goods. And so to try to figure out how long can a driver be exposed to the heat when he's cleaning out his truck or whatever, and the break schedule, where does he take a break if he doesn't have a place to take a break? So it presents a lot of problems.
Okay. Well, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And our final questioner today is Mr. Kiley from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tresselt, I also would just like to reiterate the Chairman Wahlberg's statements regarding a tree care standard. We did a bipartisan letter on this last year. It's been a long time coming, and I would hope that OSHA would move expeditiously to finally make this happen. You know, one of the things we saw in the Biden administration was that OSHA was focusing on a lot of things that did not really relate to safety. They were doing COVID rules well after the pandemic was over. They, of course, were coming up with regulations to help out political allies. They even, of course, tried to do an illegal vaccine mandate that would have affected tens of millions of employees across the country. That was struck down by the Supreme Court. And actually, in one of the most stunning moments of the 118th Congress, the OSHA director, Douglas Parker, who, by the way, had come up from California's OSHA and had actually instituted a lot of the crazy COVID rules in California, he came and testified before this very subcommittee and actually tried to deny that any vaccine mandate had ever been issued. It was like something out of Orwell. It was down the memory hole, never happened, was never initiated, was never promulgated, when the Supreme Court actually took up the case and struck it down. It was truly a remarkable moment. But getting back to the tree care standard, you, I think, gave a very compelling explanation, Mr. Tresselt, of why this is needed and sort of the mystifying delay that we've all experienced. I want to just give you a chance to maybe cast a little more light on your participation in the 2020 panel, because I understand there was a broad array of stakeholders, you had a lot of input, there was a consensus standard for how we could protect workers in an industry where the chances of a fatal accident or incident are 30 times greater than in any other industries, and where the work of the industry is so important towards the safety of communities when it comes to fire mitigation and other purposes. So if you wanted to share your experience.
Well, the SBREFA panel was, thank you, gosh, I appreciate the question. The SBREFA panel was a very broad base of industries and all have a stake in what we were doing. But it was very clear at the end when the conclusion was the ANSI Z133 should be the framework that we need to work with to build a standard for OSHA. And having that in place would help us tremendously, protect our workers. We're here to, I know I am for myself and my team and my company, my small company. I want people to go home at night. I want them to enjoy their lives and to go home to their kids and their families and their dogs and their cats and their friends and have the barbecue on the weekend. And all of this means that we have to work diligently as employers to keep them safe. And the hazards that we face in tree care are tremendous. We work in public spaces. We work aloft. We work with a lot of machinery. So all of this being said, the SBREFA panel said, you're right, we should do this. This should be happening. And as the other congressman said, we've been fighting for this for 20 years. And we're not looking to be regulated, we're looking to be helped, because we want to keep our people safe. We don't want to have fatalities. We want to reduce the amount of injuries. We want to do the things that are right for our people, and we need OSHA's help. And we're not asking OSHA to reinvent the tree care wheel. We're asking them to paint it their color. Make it something that we can all use to keep people safe.
Right now, you're sort of left to your own devices, and I'd imagine that you have inspectors who come in and are sort of trying to apply standards, regulations that are not specific to your industry, and that kind of leaves you guessing as to what exactly you're supposed to do, or maybe trying to tailor your practices to a standard that doesn't really fit. Is that what you've experienced?
Absolutely. So there is no standards directly for tree care, so that's a patchwork of standards that they pick from and pick and choose, and sometimes that's problematic. Take, for the example, the use of a crane when you take down a tree. We have trees that are very compromised. They're very dangerous to climb. We can't climb those, or we can't get aerial lifts to them or things like that. So we use a crane to access a climber who will actually go into the tree and then safely dismantle and remove it. But the general duty clause says, no, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that, that you can't use the crane, to put a man or a person into the tree to do that, which then makes it almost impossible to remove the tree safely, because now we're at a crossroads where we can't do it safely, or we have to jeopardize worker safety. And when it comes to my business, we don't jeopardize worker safety. We would either refuse to do the tree or find something else. There really is a lot, and we have our hands tied at times, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Z133 supports it. It's been approved. It's an industry consensus standard. We can do it safely. We've done it safely. Crane use has been used in our industry for over 50 years.
Thanks very much. We will keep advocating for it, and I yield back.
Thank you. And with that, we will go to closing remarks, and I'd like to recognize the ranking member for her closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you once again to our witnesses for speaking with us today. Yesterday, Secretary Kennedy sat before our Senate counterparts and tried to defend his reckless decisions to fire thousands of civil servants at NIOSH. A decision that was partially reversed once DOJ realized that firing the people who prevent workplace injury, illness, and death might have been a mistake. We have learned today that his testimony was not even accurate. More than 60% of NIOSH's staff have now been returned to service, and that have not been returned to service, and that includes many working scientists. Secretary Kennedy says that he cares about the harms of toxic chemical exposure, but he has fired the very scientists who assess those harms in the workplace. This fiasco with NIOSH is a prime example of the Trump administration's disregard for workers' lives and livelihoods. Today's hearing is just the latest attempt to weaken the institutions and rules that simply keep workers safe and healthy at their jobs. Since January, DOJ has fired thousands of federal workers, targeted dozens of OSHA and mine safety offices, and hollowed out critical resources and protections for working people. But instead of investigating the real harms these cuts will cause, Republicans are once again using this hearing to demonize OSHA rather than fund it. Investigations into workplace safety, like training, protective gear, and common sense protections such as the proposed heat stress rule, are both morally right and fiscally savvy. Preventing injuries could save billions of dollars in healthcare costs, workers' compensation, and lost productivity. Our worker protection agencies don't just save lives, but they also deliver real financial returns for working families and for our economy. Undermining federal health and safety agencies will not improve efficiency. It just puts American workers at a higher risk of preventable injuries, illnesses, and even death. Workers deserve a better treatment as pawns in a political game. So instead of taking a chainsaw to these vital programs that our constitutions rely on, we must fully fund these health and safety organizations to save workers' lives and finally give workers the protections they have long been promised. And I will end where I began my remarks this morning. No job should ever cost someone their life, and every worker deserves to come home every day safe, healthy, and whole. If we cannot even agree on that basic premise, then we will just continue to talk past each other in these hearing rooms. But if we can, then maybe we can start the real work of supporting the health, dignity, and well-being of all workers across this country. Thank you, and I yield the balance.
Thank you. And first, I'd like to start by recognizing everybody here today. And on behalf of the members of the subcommittee, I want to thank the witnesses for the perspective that they gave on how we can actually help OSHA fulfill their mission of worker safety across this country. And so the hearing today was very different, at least my experience, than what the ranking member just spoke about. I think it was a very clear mischaracterization of this testimony and this hearing that we all experienced. What I heard was employers that are actually seeking clarity and flexibility in OSHA standards that they can actually go out and implement in real-world applications to provide and ensure worker safety all across this country. I think that's something that I think everybody in a bipartisan fashion, we heard from some of the other testifiers or witnesses who were talking with some of the members from the minority party about that bipartisan approach that should actually be implemented. So I thought today was actually a very constructive hearing. This was not a partisan affair. It was something where we, as the majority party, Republicans, are actually recognizing specific instances where we can improve worker safety. We talked about the tree care industry and how one of the most dangerous industries out there is operating under a patchwork of applications, and that should be improved. We think OSHA actually should be issuing regulations in that space to make sure that those workers are safe. We also talked a lot about the heat standard today. Again, a very serious issue that does need to be addressed so that worker safety on job sites is carried out in a safe fashion. But we heard from testifiers how a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work in practice. It's not going to match the reality of job sites. And ultimately, it's going to be something that if it's not done correctly, it's not actually going to help workers because they will never see the results of it in their actual experience on construction sites and paving projects all across our country. So with that, I would just like to thank our witnesses again for the incredible testimony that you've provided. It is so helpful and meaningful as we do our work here as a subcommittee, but also as we communicate with the administration on their regulations that they've proposed and that we're going to hopefully see coming in the near future. What we'd like to see is, again, making sure that workplace safety is a key priority for all workplaces across this entire country, and that those that violate those in willful repeat violations do face penalties. And so again, that is a balance that I think can be struck, but the way that we're going to actually come up with regulations that do that and actually can be implemented in practice are by hearing and listening to those that are going to be most directly affected. So I want to thank all of you again and look forward to working with my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion as we move to advance worker safety all across our country. Thank you again, and with that, without objection, there's no further business, and the subcommittee stands adjourned.